to Football Never Sleeps, and we're not sleeping either. It's our off-season Notre Dame football YouTube show, and we are not going to be focusing on buyouts this week, but we do have a lot of news. The offensive staff is coming together for Notre Dame. Tyler is down at the NFL Combine in Indianapolis. We've got some more recruiting shenanigans, and we will also be taking your questions during the segments when we talk about those things. I wanted to remind you that we're on weekly, but we move the schedule around to react to the news. So this week, Thursday night at 5 o'clock. Last week, we're on Monday. So it's really important to hit the subscribe button and hit the notification bells so that you know, well, there's just one of them. So you know when we have new content. Again, we're going to be taking your questions. We'll work them in during the show when we get to those topics. So get your questions in the portal, and we'll get to them as we move along.
Yeah, we this is the earliest we've done Football Never Sleeps, so hopefully we're not in the middle of people's nap times. But this is the best window for us to get it done this week, and we'll probably be back at a later time in the evening next week. But like Eric said, feel free to send comments and questions throughout the show. We like to incorporate those as much as we can, and we appreciate everyone who does take the time to get us to talk about something rather than what's already in our head. So, Eric, let's get started and talk about Notre Dame's next offensive line coach, and we know who that will be now, and it's Joe Rudolph from Virginia Tech and previously Wisconsin. I guess probably most famously Wisconsin. What did you think of how this all came together from Notre Dame's point of view in terms of getting Joe Rudolph to be their guy to replace Harry Hiestand?
I liked it. If people have been following the chats, Football Never Sleeps on our podcast, Joe Rudolph was my number one candidate from the start, the person that I thought would be best for it. And for them to go after Matt Luke, who I viewed as a long shot because he had gotten away from coaching and nothing related to Notre Dame. He just wanted a break and spending time with his family. He was the first one that got interviewed. Then Joe Rudolph was up next. I think Brian Callahan from Minnesota would have been the next person in, and any of those three would have been, I don't want to say a home run hire because that's what everybody else said. I'll say a 99-yard touchdown hire. I really like all three of them, but I think Joe Rudolph is the best for a lot of reasons. One, his background at Wisconsin. He's from Western Pennsylvania. He's got offensive coordinator experience, 9 years of that. Not a lot of play calling, but a lot of experience that will help new offensive coordinator Jared Parker. He's put a lot of guys into the NFL, has had 5 first-team All-Americans at Wisconsin. So I think there's a lot to like. I think at 50 years old, he's going to have the energy to recruit. And we had Clint Cosgrove on our podcast. He's a national recruiting analyst for Rivals, but he used to be in the coaching business, coached with Joe at Nebraska early in Joe's career. And also Clint's father had known the Rudolph family for years. And so we really got some great insight into what we can expect. I just think it's a really good fit, which is part of what goes on with Notre Dame. And I think there's enough old school in Joe Rudolph that I don't think it's going to be culture shock for the players, that there's going to be a technique-driven teaching, and they're going to be coached hard, and they're used to that. So I think that's going to be a welcome part of this transition.
Yeah, it does seem like there's a lot of similarities there between the two in terms of the way they go about their business. Now, obviously, he's a younger coach, doesn't quite have the elite level NFL production resume that Harry Hiestand has in terms of the guys that he's put into the NFL. But I'm interested to see what he can do as a recruiter. I think for as good as Harry Hiestand was an offensive line coach, recruiting wasn't his strong point, but I think he did a good job of getting guys that he knew would work for him and would get obviously then sort of develop those guys into guys that could be really productive at Notre Dame. So I do think, and we saw even before Joe Rudolph was picked, that Notre Dame was starting to expand its offensive line board because it felt like there were maybe some other guys that Notre Dame hadn't decided to offer yet, but felt like were talented enough that deserved an offer that maybe there was some pushback on previously, that Notre Dame sort of went after those guys. And we'll see if Notre Dame can get some traction with them with a new offensive line coach. So I think those things all sort of add up. And I think that sort of hard-nosed coaching mindset, I think, aligns with Marcus Freeman. I know there's like this perception out there that he's a player's coach just because he's so likable and guys like to play for him, but he's a hard-nosed guy himself. You might present it in a different way and have a nice smile that goes with it that can maybe convince you otherwise. But I think that sort of aligns with what Marcus Freeman wants, what it sounds like Jared Parker will value as an offensive coordinator. So I think it's come together pretty well. I mean, the Matt Luke thing, I like the Matt Luke name. He certainly had some high points in his resume. I wasn't necessarily sold that he would have been like a home run hire. I think it would have been a good hire, a great hire. But he hadn't necessarily had a track record of producing offensive lines that were paving the way for elite running games or protecting the quarterback at an elite level. So that doesn't mean he wouldn't have been able to have a success at Notre Dame, but I wasn't necessarily going to start a parade if Notre Dame got Matt Luke. It would have been impressive that just the fact that they would sort of talk him out of retirement at this age when he walked away from a national championship team and a very good offensive line would have been impressive. But I think there's still reason to have belief that this offense will be headed in the right direction this coming season. And as we've discussed before, a lot of that has to do with the personnel that Notre Dame has, but it seems like the coaching staff is falling in line to put Notre Dame in a position to grow with this personnel as well. I know you did some reporting in terms of what's happening around Joe Rudolph with the offensive line coaching staff. Can you fill our viewers in on that?
Right. So people wondered what would happen to Chris Watt if Chris Watt didn't get the job, and Chris Watt didn't get the job. And he also was out of you only get so many years of graduate assistant status, and then you've got to move on to something else, either full-time or analyst. And he's moved on to Notre Dame's analyst crew. So he will also be involved in the offensive line to a certain extent. Now, right now, analysts can't do on-the-field coaching. There's some legislation that's been tabled that will probably come up again for a vote and probably have enough support to have analysts do some on-field coaching. So that would give Joe Rudolph, a guy that has the connection to Harry Hiestand and the Notre Dame football culture, played for Harry and coached under Harry. The other development there is Rob Delaney is the new grad assistant. He's a University of Dayton graduate, and he's been a graduate assistant a couple other places, including Illinois. And so he'll be assisting with the offensive line. And I think those are two good developments. The fact that Chris Watt is still around, I think, is a good thing, because I think, he just needs more experience before he steps into a job. Even, he was at Tulane for a year. Even a job of that caliber, I think he just needs a little bit more seasoning, but lots of potential with Chris. I know Harry thinks the world of him. Yeah,
and I think that should aid in the transition in terms of getting those guys to continue to buy into what Joe Rudolph wants to do, and helping sort of communicate the differences in between maybe how Harry Hiestand would describe things, or the philosophy that they had, and maybe the small differences that would exist with Joe Rudolph and how he teaches things. So having someone there beyond, obviously you'd expect like the senior players to be able to help with that, but to have Chris Watt, who was involved in helping teach it, there to help that transition should be a good thing for Notre Dame as well.
So we'll move on then to Gino. I said Gadugli probably, or something stupid like that. I get my Italian heritage revoked for saying that. It's Guidugli, that G. Whenever you have a GLI in Italian, and it is common in their language, that G is not pronounced. So Guidugli. If you hear me say Guidugli, throw something at the screen or make fun of me in the comments. But he has
that's usually my role. I'm usually the one that makes fun of you for how you say things.
That's right. So chime in with Tyler and make fun of me. So I apologize for butchering his name. I think last show. I probably even had Italian food for dinner that night. I'm ashamed of myself. So he's official. We ran a story when he was unofficially announced and then officially announced. And, one of the nice resources was Rick Minter with that story, because Rick had recruited him and coached him his first 3 years at Cincinnati and had stayed in touch with him, had watched his coaching career. So there was a lot of great insight into somebody that had known, Gino for a long time. And I'm pretty excited about this hire because, again, it's a guy with some offensive coordinator experience. He also has, significant quarterback coaching experience. Now, early in his career, he was a running backs coach. He played quarterback for Cincinnati, was their most prolific passer in their history for a long time until he was their quarterbacks coach and coached a kid named Desmond Ridder, a 2-star prospect, into being an NFL draft choice, and Desmond broke Gino's records. So just in the sampling, I've talked to people around coaching that I know and so forth. They really like the addition of Gino and think it's going to be really positive. I think the other thing that's really interesting is he can bring ideas both that align with what Marcus Freeman wants to do and what Jared Parker wants to do offensively. He also has the air raid stuff in his background. So if they want to try some wrinkles, he's very familiar with that too. So I'm eager to have a chance to meet him, and I think we'll probably have that chance here in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, and he was a prolific quarterback at Cincinnati himself. And I think that always helps when you're talking to players and try to relate to them. I know a lot of guys would talk about, well, Tommy Rees has done it. Like, he's literally done what he's asking us to do because he was a Notre Dame quarterback. Now, obviously, Gino wasn't at Notre Dame, but he played at a very high level at Cincinnati and set records there. And even though he's not as young as Tommy Rees, he's a soon-to-be 40-year-old, I believe. So he's still a pretty young coach. I think that should help him relate and be active in coaching with those guys. So I think there's a lot to like about that. I know the question I sort of relayed was like, okay, did he create Desmond Ridder, or did Desmond Ridder sort of create him? And I think we'll get a good idea of that, although he has a pretty good starting point there with Sam Hartman. It's not like he needs to mold Sam Hartman into some sort of newfangled quarterback, because Sam Hartman has a pretty good grasp of what he's doing back there from his career at Wake Forest. So I think I'm interested to see not only what he's able to do with Sam Hartman, but how he continues to develop those younger quarterbacks and put Notre Dame in a position to keep having success at the quarterback position in future years. So it's a really important job. And I think that's why we thought, well, it would make a lot of sense for the offensive coordinator to be a quarterback's coach, because of how important this role is at this moment in time for Notre Dame. But I think that you're going to have an individualized quarterback's coach that doesn't have to worry about calling plays, can get on the same page with the offensive coordinator, Jared Parker. I think it makes a lot of sense, and the familiarity that Notre Dame staff has with him, it all sort of adds up into something that you can see being successful at Notre Dame. Interested to see like what he does as a recruiter. Certainly, CJ Carr is already committed in the 2024 class. Notre Dame is continuing to look at some 2025 quarterback recruits, and I know a couple are expected to be on campus in the next couple months. So that will be interesting to sort of track where he picks up and who he's favoring in terms of 2025 quarterback prospects. But I think who we'd like to hear from now. I think getting a chance to talk to CJ Carr would be good about what he thinks of Gino Guidugli. And certainly we have a pretty good idea that we'll get to talk to Sam Hartman next week about Gino Guidugli and everything that's sort of gone on since he decided to come to Notre Dame, which has been quite a bit. And I know we've wanted to talk to him, but it only makes sense to talk to him after he has a better sense of what's going on at Notre Dame, and now he should have all those answers for him. What are you looking forward to hearing from Sam Hartman when we get a chance to talk to him next week, Eric?
Everything. I mean, it was first scheduled for February 3rd, and then the whole Tommy Rees thing happened, and it kept getting bounced back, and finally next Wednesday is going to be the date that we'll have a chance to talk to Sam. I mean, I think I mentioned this on the podcast. I'm really curious what his whole take is on the coaching change. How it's affected him, what he thinks of the new coaches, and kind of what went through his mind when the whole Alabama thing came up with Tommy Rees. I'm really curious about how his chemistry is with Tyler Buckner and the other quarterbacks in their quarterback room. I anticipate that's actually going to be pretty good, and I think he's going to be really good for those younger players. It was interesting when I had a chance to talk to CJ Carr just before all the coaching changes happened, how enamored he was with Sam Hartman. He watched the Netflix docuseries that Sam was a part of when Sam was a high school senior, and really couldn't wait. Very excited about Hartman coming to Notre Dame and wanting to get a chance to meet him. And then how the whole thing with the wide receivers are going, what Sam thinks of the wide receiver core, how he thinks he can help them grow. I've heard really good things about Caleb Smith's role with him already. Caleb Smith, the elder, I'll call him, the transfer from Virginia Tech, as opposed to Caleb Smith, the freshman who's coming in June. But there's 9 out of the 10 receivers are on campus this spring, and so lots of interesting things. Just to get to know Sam Hartman. I mean, just from the guests we've had on the podcast, we had Coach Greer as high school coach on. We had the young man from Wake Forest that covers Connor O'Neill. And just a fascinating guy who I don't know that he's in love with the media, but hopefully he'll love us enough.
Yeah, maybe he'll like us more because he hasn't been talking to us for years, like he was with the guys at Wake Forest. I think we can get a little bit boring if you talk to us for too long. So hopefully
there's more of us.
Yeah, there are more of us. So maybe he'll like some of us and not like some of the others of us. But we'll see how that all plays out. Speaking of Sam Hartman, we had a question submitted by Jerry McClurg that asked, Marcus Freeman says Notre Dame will be a run-first offense. Does this hamper the advantage of having Sam Hartman?
No, not at all. And I think when Marcus says run first, that doesn't mean run first and don't pass. It means run first down. Right. Or run on first down. It means being a good enough run team that you're putting with a passer like Sam Hartman, you're putting a opposing defensive coordinator in a run pass dilemma on almost every down. If you're good at both, especially if you can't run and they know you have to pass, they can get you in second and third and long and really make life difficult for you. But if they don't know whether you're going to run or pass and you do those play action fakes, they're going to work, and it's going to make Sam Hartman a better quarterback having a really good running game around him. So I think maybe run first isn't even the right terminology as much as it is being run good, being run, run DMC. I don't know.
Run efficient.
Yeah, run efficient. I would say run efficient, because you look at the teams that get to the championship game. Now, again, they're not always prolific running teams. They're all very good at it. When Notre Dame played Alabama in the semifinal in 2020, Alabama wasn't a prolific running team, but man, they could do it whenever they wanted to. And that made their whole passing game go. You look at that offense, when you think of run efficient, that's what Marcus is talking about.
Yeah, and it's the ability to like impose your will on a team,
right? And close a game out.
Close the game out. Yeah, that's extremely important. Being able to do that to me, it's like when the defense knows you're running the football, you can still run the football. That is a very valuable thing, and that helps you sort of dictate the way the game flows. It can allow you to sort of sit on the football sometimes if you feel like your defense is going to be at a disadvantage against the opposing offense. You can do a lot of different things if you have a successful running game, and it doesn't mean you have to run it all the time or, like I said, run on first down every series. But I do think it will open things up for Sam Hartman, and I think he wants to be in an offense that is more traditional. At least this is our understanding of it. We haven't been able to hear from Sam specifically, but I think he understands that he's coming into an offense, whether it was Tommy Rees as the offensive coordinator or Jared Parker as the offensive coordinator, that will value running the football, and in doing that, potentially open up some better throwing opportunities for Sam Hartman. So I think that'll be welcome. After all the throwing of the football that Sam Hartman has done, I'd imagine he'd be happy to not have the game sort of always on his arm or on his shoulders, and have some more help in the running game supporting him, and not be the focal point of an opposing defense at all times, because I imagine that can wear on you as a quarterback.
Right. So,
and we don't have any more questions in the queue. So if you have questions, please send them our way. There is an opening. So we'll be happy to ask whatever you want to know.
Right. And I don't want Tyler to ask me too many questions. Okay. Our next segment, we're going to talk about some recruiting shenanigans and developments. There's both. And let's start with the CJ Carr situation or non-situation. Now, Tyler, this is something you were working on late last night.
Right.
Why don't you bring our viewers up to speed on what's going on with CJ Carr as you know it?
Yeah. So CJ Carr, we've discussed in the past, his 7-on-7 team is California Power, which allows him to play with a lot of talented wide receiver recruits specifically. And whether it's Ryan Wingo or Emmett Mosley, Quasi Gilmore, Terrence Moore, there's a lot of talented players that he's surrounding himself with, which in the long run maybe can help Notre Dame recruit some of those guys that it's already been recruiting, but to get him around those guys gives them maybe some incentive to continue to consider Notre Dame. But a byproduct of that is that he's traveling the country playing in these 7-on-7 tournaments, and these 7-on-7 teams like to take advantage of being near college campuses, and those college campuses also like to take advantage of 7-on-7 tournaments when they're near them. So earlier this year, CJ Carr visited Washington while in the Seattle area for a 7-on-7 tournament, and we learned last night that he will be in the Houston area with the 7-on-7 team this weekend, which will also include a trip to Texas A&M. So it was first just flat reported that he will be visiting Texas A&M. So everyone's like, "Oh no, what's going on? Should we start panicking?" And given the coaching turnover on the offensive side of the ball, there's some uneasiness, I think, from Notre Dame fans, and also based on how the quarterback recruiting cycle went last year. I understand the potential nervousness when it's just reported, "Hey, CJ Carr is visiting Texas A&M this weekend." But as we dug into it, learning the context around it, it's not as concerning. I think anytime kids are visiting somewhere else, it needs to be taken seriously, because you never know when you step on it. I mean, I just going from my own college recruiting process, but just considering college, like when I stepped on DePaul University's campus, I was like, this is where I want to be. And so maybe that moment happens for someone, even if they're not necessarily intending on it to. So I think it's worth knowing and definitely being aware of. But at this point, I don't think it's worth panicking about that Notre Dame's quarterback commit will be visiting Texas A&M this weekend. And like I said earlier, we'd like to catch up with CJ, get his thoughts on the offensive coordinator, Jared Parker, and the quarterback's coach, and Gino Guidugli. Haven't had a chance to do that yet, but hopefully we can hear from him soon to get his thoughts on those guys and maybe reassure some Notre Dame fans that may be a little bit nervous given the news of him being on Texas A&M's campus this weekend.
Right. And I get that Notre Dame fans are going to be nervous because of what happened in the last cycle with guys taking visits and then eventually going somewhere else. You know, when I had a chance to spend some time with CJ, and again, this is before Tommy Rees was leaving, one of the things that I wanted to get to the bottom of was how strong his relationship was with Marcus Freeman. And it's very strong. Marcus was smart being the lead recruiter, especially on somebody like CJ Carr. Because if you look at Notre Dame's history, offensive coordinators don't last long. I mean, you got to go all the way back to, Era's time. And really, I mean, Charlie was the offensive coordinator 4 or 5 of the years that he was there. But generally, both quarterback coaches and offensive coordinators don't last a full career for most players in this day and age. And so, he had, I think CJ knew Tommy wasn't going to be there to coach him his entire career. He just wasn't sure when that break was going to come. And so he's got a good relationship there. And he was just so invested in recruiting for Notre Dame. He really loves it. Now, could there be a, not a great chemistry mix with him and the new offensive coordinator and the new quarterbacks coach? Sure. And I think he and his family would like to get to know those people. You don't instantly have a relationship. It's got to come over time. So let's see how that plays out. So I think he will eventually, from what I like Jared Parker. I mean, so I think CJ will like Jared Parker, and I think Geno is going to be a real key. I think that's almost the bigger hire. I mean, you want Jared Parker stepping up in big games and calling plays against elite defensive coordinators in big games. But I think Geno Gaduli is going to end up, when we look back years from now, is going to end up being the key hire of those two. So it's going to be interesting to see how those two interact.
Just got a question in here from Anthony Campbell asking why no one mentions Kenny Minchey but is so hyped about 2024.
Well, CJ Carr is, in terms of being evaluated, a guy that seems like a can't miss kind of player. I think eventually he's going to be a consensus 5-star, even though On3 dropped him into the 200s. So I don't know what's going on over at that place, but maybe they had too much tequila during their rankings sessions or something. But at least by the established rivals in 247 Sports, he's going to be a 5-star, I think, when all is said and done. Minchey is one of those guys that could be low floor, high ceiling. I mean, you really don't know how he's going to turn out because we don't have enough information about him. And part of that was because he was hurt a big portion of his senior year, but he's intriguing as heck. Yeah, I mean, Kenny Minchey could beat CJ Carr out. CJ Carr, though, I think if Kenny Minchey's on campus, but if he was still able to take visits, I think people would be a lot less nervous about that. And he did already decommit from Pitt because of the perception, because Notre Dame hasn't gotten a guy like CJ Carr in a long time. And not that that's always ended well. It didn't end well with Gunnar Kiel, for example.
Right.
But to get that guy on campus, I think that's a perception. People look at Notre Dame winning games in the playoff, the missing piece being the biggest missing piece being an elite quarterback. All of a sudden, you have Sam Hartman on campus and you have CJ Carr committed. And that gets people excited because then you can address the smaller missing pieces and that's exciting. So people are more worried about, CJ Carr and have higher hopes because that's how he's projected. Again, it doesn't always work out that way. And I'm a big Kenny Minchey honk. So, so you can hear my impressions of him. I'm going to get a chance to meet him next Wednesday, and I'm excited about it.
Yeah, and I think part of it has to do with just the order that they committed. Like CJ Carr was committed first, so everyone got excited about him, and then Kenny Minchey came along much later, and wasn't a guy that Notre Dame was going after early in the process, and then ended up circling back with him and getting him in the class. I really like Kenny Minchey as well. I think there's a lot of upside there with him as a quarterback, and I think that Notre Dame's quarterback room is in a pretty good spot, especially considering where it was, I don't know, 7 or 8 months ago. So I think that Notre Dame's done a good job of putting itself in a better position in the quarterback room and putting guys in there that are intriguing, that can compete beyond Sam Hartman for years to come. So I think there's reason to be excited and interested about Kenny Minchey. But I also understand why people are so fired up about CJ Carr. He's always been considered a very highly touted prospect. Kenny Minchey's recruiting rankings were different. He was lower and then sort of slowly jumped up in the rankings as his career played out, at least on Rivals. So I think that's different, but it could be the reverse. I don't expect that to happen to CJ Carr, where he starts high and then drops a bit. Drew Pine was someone that was very high, that folks were very high on early, even not just the recruiting sites, but the coaching staffs across the country. And so I think you can be a little bit nervous that maybe a guy can peak like that, but I don't see that for CJ Carr. So I think there's room for people to be excited about both of those guys. And I think that will be a fun quarterback room to watch in the future at Notre Dame.
Right. And so right now we think that the drama has been overstated on that. Now, the other recruiting shenanigan has to do with the transfer portal. And there was a young man by the name of Mason Lunsford. He's from Maryland. He would be a grad transfer. He entered the transfer portal maybe a week or so ago. And he can do that because he's a graduate student. They don't have to wait till the May window to put their name in. And then he announces on Twitter that he was going to be visiting Notre Dame this weekend without an offer, hoping to pick up an offer. And then the brakes kind of got put on that visit. And so he's got some other really good offers. LSU is one of the places that's interested in him. He's a guard with 2 years of eligibility. And so right now it's really on hold. I think Notre Dame wants to just let things with the new offensive line coach, let him get to know the guys he has, let it play out a little bit. There's some really good young interior offensive linemen. They'd like to see how much they've grown up. There's also some tackles, backup tackles that might want to compete as Josh Lugg did for a guard spot and move inside. So we'll see how that plays out. But, that was like big headline on our page and then big headline the other way on our page, a very short period of time.
Yeah, I didn't do a ton of digging into sort of like how it all like played out in the way it did, because in the end I don't know that it matters too much. But I had been saying for a while that Notre Dame had some interest in looking at interior offensive linemen as potential transfers in to compete for one of its open starting spots. And clearly there was some communication there with Mason Lunsford, although there was not an offer extended, which is important to note. And when Notre Dame's in the middle of like naming an offensive line coach, it was kind of surprising. It's like, oh, wow, this kid's already coming on the campus. They must feel confident in bringing him on. And then you find out not long after that, it's like, no, actually, we're not that convinced that we want to bring him on campus. And we like the guys that we have in our offensive line room. So, and I am in agreement of that. I think there is talent there. I think it always makes sense to look. If you can get a guy that you can bring in that that has started, has experience, and you feel confident that they can sort of gel in with the group of guys that you have, then I think you have to. I think you're doing yourself a disservice if you don't at least consider it. So we'll see if maybe Joe Rudolph gets in here and goes through spring practice. He's like, you know what? I think we could use another offensive lineman through the transfer portal. So I wouldn't rule that out, but I think it makes sense for Notre Dame to sort of stand pat right now, consider and give these guys an opportunity in front of Joe Rudolph to prove themselves this spring and sort of reevaluate where they're at moving forward.
Right. Another thing that could affect it is injury or
Sure.
somebody transfers out that you're not expecting. I'll give you an example of when this paid off for Notre Dame. It was in 2020. They contacted Nick McLeod at NC State, a cornerback from NC State, in January, and expressed some interest, but they kind of slow played him. And then the pandemic came in March of 2020. Well, Notre Dame's plan was to look at their young cornerbacks in spring practice. Well, guess what? They had one spring practice in 2020, and then everybody went home, and they got to thinking, hey, here's a proven commodity. Let's take this guy. We don't know what's going to go on in the summer. We don't even know if there's going to be a season, but let's bring him in and see what he can do. And lo and behold, Nick McLeod was a starter for Notre Dame in 2020. So it doesn't mean they're necessarily done with this kid or done with the concept. But you need to let spring practice. Hopefully there's nothing that reduces the number of spring practices from 15 to 1. But if
don't even put that out there.
Yeah. But if there is one, it'll be March 22nd. We know that that's the first day of spring practice.
Yeah, and I'm personally a fan of like the condensed window of spring practice where it's March 22nd to is it April 23rd when the Blue Gold game is?
I think it's April 22nd.
April 22nd, so a month exactly. So I think I'm a fan of that. We'll be busy during that month stretch, but that's good for us, and it's not interrupted by spring break for Notre Dame's players. So it makes a lot of sense, and we'll see more of Notre Dame focusing its recruiting weekends for the spring later in the spring, which honestly probably makes a lot of sense weather-wise. You lessen your chance of having kids come on a campus for spring practice with snow in the air. So I think that could all play out well in Notre Dame's favor. Now, I don't know what the schedule looks like in terms of what other schools are prioritizing. Now, obviously, we know Texas A&M is hosting kids this weekend, so there will be some schools getting a jump on getting guys on campus in the spring compared to Notre Dame. But I think I sort of like how the spring is setting up for Notre Dame, both for the team and having this time to be ready with the new coaches on staff, and then also for the recruiting aspect of it as well.
Tyler, I was on our Insider Lounge message board today filling in some new visitors. And boy, it's starting to become a pretty impressive list. Anybody that you'd like to highlight of late that's been added to that visitors list that you think is notable?
Yeah, I think all three that you reported on today were notable. Jaden Riddell from Missouri, a 4-star tight end.
Peculiar Missouri.
Peculiar. We
I
know
wonder
that
if they pronounce it like that.
Yeah, Peculiar maybe.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding. We know Notre Dame wants to add a second tight end in this class to go with Jack Larson. Carter Nelson is a name that we've been keeping an eye on as of late, and Jaden Riddell is now another name worth noting. Jamie French is a wide receiver, a 4-star wide receiver from Jacksonville. Notre Dame is also after his teammate John Mitchell, a cornerback in the 2024 class. Those guys received offers when Notre Dame was down playing or preparing for the Gator Bowl in Jacksonville. So getting those guys on campus is important. And then Caleb Beasley's sort of the headliner because he's committed to Tennessee. Notre Dame has been fervent in continuing to recruit him, made a number of stops at his school during the visit windows in December and January. And he's clearly still showing interest. So that's someone that Notre Dame likes. Notre Dame wants to add another cornerback in this 2024 class, despite already having commitments from Leonard Moore and Carson Hobbs, which is a good duo to begin with. So I like the aggressiveness from Notre Dame at the cornerback position because I feel like you can never have too many cornerbacks. Like that's a spot. And cornerback is, in my opinion, like one of the hardest spots to change a player's position to. Like you don't have many options that you can pull from another position on the field to put at cornerback unless you can do Avery Davis and just play him in every single skill position on offense
and Cam Hart.
And Cam Hart, but yeah. So, but you're most likely going to get a wide receiver to turn into a corner, right. But that's about it. Like you're not going to turn a safety into a corner very likely, and unless it's Avery Davis, you're not going to turn a quarterback into a cornerback either. So, so those are good additions to the list. It's an impressive list, and it continues to grow. And I know Notre Dame will continue adding names to it. Cameron Clark will be the one that's on campus the soonest. He's scheduled to be on campus tomorrow for Notre Dame, an intriguing defensive end out of Tennessee that also plays tight end. So I think people should be keeping track of what we're reporting on the Insider Lounge and subscribing to Inside ND Sports if you're not, because there will be lots to discuss and report on in the next coming months in terms of recruiting. And we're even talking about guys that are setting up official visits into June. There's a defensive end from Hawaii, Anulu Lafayette. I need to learn the pronunciation of his name better by the time he officially visits. Obviously, Notre Dame has had success recruiting in Hawaii. Brian Mason has taken over the Hawaii recruiting responsibilities for Notre Dame. So poor him that he has to go out to Hawaii every once in a while. But I feel like that's a good reward for the job that he did as special teams coordinator last season. So there's a lot of names that are worth watching. Kennedy Urlacher is someone who we've talked about before. Obviously, everyone knows the name just because of who his dad is, but that is a safety prospect that Notre Dame likes a lot. And I think the interest is pretty mutual in terms of being high on Notre Dame from Kennedy's perspective. Although, as I reported in a story earlier I guess it was last month in February, LSU was a dream school of his growing up. So that would be heartbreaking for Notre Dame fans if LSU comes in there and gets in the mix and makes things a little bit more difficult for Notre Dame. So he does not have an offer from the Tigers and Brian Kelly yet, but something to keep an eye on if that transpires down the line.
One more recruiting thing before we move on to the NFL Combine segment. It seemed like even in the interim of Harry retiring and Joe Rudolph being named or unofficially named, that there's been a lot of offensive line offers going out. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I think Harry Hiestand was particular in guys that he wanted to recruit. He wanted guys that fit what he wants to do, that fit sort of the room. And I think that is important. Like that is something that Harry Hiestand values, is sort of that not just it's because it goes beyond camaraderie. Like obviously the guys want to get along, but sort of the bond between those guys and both on and off the field. And that's something that has been very valuable to Notre Dame's offensive line. And that continued while Jeff Quinn was at Notre Dame as well. And we'll see how Joe Rudolph handles that and what that becomes under him. But there were some like guys that were highly rated or highly recruited. Even Ian Moore from in-state here in Indiana, he's ranked as the number one offensive tackle in the 2024 class. And he didn't have an offer from Notre Dame until recently. He committed to Ohio State back in October and told us that he wasn't necessarily interested in Notre Dame. So we'll see if that changes with Joe Rudolph on staff. But it's a bit at this point, but we'll see if that can change. You never necessarily know. Just like Brandon Baker out of Mater Dei High School in California that are receiving a number of offers but didn't have Notre Dame on the list, has since received a Notre Dame offer. So that would be something to continue to monitor. We'll see what those guys' interest level in Joe Rudolph and Notre Dame is moving forward.
Before we move on to the NFL Combine segment, is there any questions we missed that we needed to jump back to?
Yeah, let's do this from Ron Robert. How does Kenny Minchey compare to Desmond Ridder, who Gino Guidugli had success with?
I think there's some interesting comparisons. Desmond was not nearly as highly recruited as Kenny Minchey or highly rated as Kenny Minchey. He was a 2-star. I think he was from Louisville. Tall, thin kid. I think Minchey is more filled out and is at least had a little bit more national exposure than Desmond did. I think that's part of the 2-star ranking was because he wasn't a guy that went out and got to some of the evaluation camps and so forth. But there's some parallels there in terms of what their raw skill set is like. So I think that's an interesting observation.
Yeah, I think they're athletic guys that aren't necessarily going to run first, but they can make some plays with their legs and extend plays with their legs. I'm less familiar with what Desmond Ridder looked like as a high school player. Like I haven't spent a minute watching his high school film, so it's hard for us to compare what Desmond Ridder was like as a college recruit. But in terms of what he became at Cincinnati, I think anyone would sort of be happy to sort of have that comparison as a guy that had a lot of success at Cincinnati and became a draft pick.
4-year starter too.
4-year starter, broke some of Gino Guidulli's records at Cincinnati. So I think those are things that it's an interesting question and a good parallel, I think, from Ron Robert to throw out there. All right, I have one more. It's more of a statement than a question from Michael Campbell, but he has been active in our chat, so I want to bring up one of them. We need the hype out over the Notre Dame wide receiver talents for Sam Hartman. You can't get buzz out if Notre Dame media is silent about what Freeman has put together with Chancey Stuckey.
I was talking to Tom Lemming, the longtime recruiting analyst, the other morning about some other things, but including Notre Dame recruiting, and he thinks Chancey Stuckey has been doing an outstanding job. Certainly got 3 top 150, top caliber recruits in this recruiting class, and then a guy in the younger Caleb Smith, who I think people think are a real diamond in the rough. It was a kid that was committed to Texas Tech, and they were able to poach him out of their class. And then the other Caleb Smith, who I think is probably going to be a starter for Notre Dame the more I think about it and the more I hear about it. So that's 5 really good additions. What I would like to see from the wide receiver room is some big jumps in development, not just from Jaden Thomas and people like that. I think Lorenzo Styles, that's really kind of the guy I would love to see a turnaround. And then a big jump. Everybody's talking about Tobias Merriweather. He had 1 catch last year, and some of that was because once he started to play, he had some concussion issues. But I think, for Tobias to kind of live up to that. So we'll see that in the spring, Mike, and then Michael, and then we can hype it up a little bit more once we see it with our own eyes that those things are happening. But certainly on the recruiting trail, and you look at Cam Williams already in the 2024 class, a top 100 caliber wide receiver from Chicago.
Yeah, I mean, it's not our job to hype up people. That's not what we do, and create buzz. Like that's not our role. Notre Dame has its own in-house media if you want that. But we report on things that we know and we hear what people say. And just today, Brandon Joseph was asked about who he thought could be the next wide receiver 1 for Notre Dame, and he said Tobias Merriweather. He said he's a super good receiver. He's going to be a super good receiver for Notre Dame, and I know some Notre Dame fans were excited about that, and then everyone wants to go back and say, well, maybe he'll be good if we actually play him, and everyone just disgruntled fans stay disgruntled fans, I suppose. But I think there's reason to believe that Tobias Merriweather has a very bright future at Notre Dame, and hopefully the concussion issue that he had at the end of the last season isn't a recurring one, and he can continue to have a healthy career and show the potential that we all believe he has. So I think there's reason to be excited about what Notre Dame has at the wide receiver position, but it would be kind of foolish to get ahead of ourselves and make these bold predictions when a lot of these guys had chances to do those things last year and didn't necessarily do that. So we think there's much better opportunity there with Sam Hartman being the quarterback for that. But I mean, wide receivers will be the number 1 and maybe number 2 position that I'm looking forward to track. I think defensive line's in that conversation as well in terms of positions of intrigue going into the spring.
Okay, well, in the NFL Combine, that's Tyler's assignment this week. He's down in Indianapolis covering the guys down there. They kind of go in order of position. So who's down there this week, Tyler? and who's not notably from Notre Dame down there that maybe should be or will have to kind of make their way and make their impression on Pro Day at Notre Dame, which is March 24th this year.
Yeah, so there were 4 Notre Dame invitees to the Combine this year: Isaiah Foskey, Brandon Joseph, Michael Mayer, and I just went blank all of a sudden, Jarrett Patterson. And so those will be the 4 guys that are here, will be down here this week. I've spoken so far to Isaiah Foskey and Brandon Joseph. As we are recording this, Isaiah Foskey is doing his NFL Combine workout, and the reports say that he ran a 4.64 unofficial time in the 40-yard dash on his first attempt and a 4.68 on his second attempt. So a pretty solid showing. It's not insane, but 4.6 is moving for a guy Isaiah Foskey's size. And we know his game is a combination of speed and power, and that allowed him to break the career sack record at Notre Dame. He had high expectations for himself in terms of being one of the fastest defensive ends for his size, one of the best jumping defensive ends for his size in terms of his explosiveness with the vertical leap and broad jump. So he has an opportunity to really show himself this week. Brandon Joseph is one that I think is really intriguing because, at least from my perspective, his season at Notre Dame didn't necessarily match expectations. He did not voice that this today when I asked him sort of straight up, how did this season play out in regards to your expectations for how it would? And he said he loved it. He got out of it what he wanted. The NFL was top of mind in terms of his decision to come to Notre Dame. He felt like it was a place that he could prove himself with talent around him and against talent on the opposing sideline. And he had opportunities to do that. Unfortunately, the end of the season was marred a bit by a high ankle sprain that he was dealing with. He came back to play in the USC game after missing 2 starts before that, and then did not play in the Gator Bowl. So he didn't exactly end his season on a high note. I think the high note was probably that interception he had against Syracuse to start the game in a pick 6. So interesting to see what happens. He was so highly regarded as a redshirt freshman at Northwestern in 2020. Had an All-American consensus All-American season, and then Northwestern stunk the next year, and he still played well, but maybe didn't match that previous season. And then this year, I think had 30 tackles, 1 interception, 1 pass breakup, so it wasn't necessarily making a lot of plays. One sort of awkward moment was he was asked by who I assume would be someone who covers Ohio State, sort of what he remembered from that hit that he had on Jackson Smith and Jigba, and I think there were thoughts that the lingering effects from that hit impacted Jackson Smith and Jigba's season because he was hurt for most of the year, and Brandon Joseph said he saw Jackson Smith and Jigba in one of the hallways and talked to him real quick, and there was no bad blood between them. And Brandon was even asked to explain what happened on the play. He's well, he was still in bounds and I hit him. So that's Brandon Joseph's side of the story. Not much to see there, at least according to him. I don't know if Ohio State fans still feel some type of way about that. I haven't been monitoring that, but I think that was sort of interesting to see him get asked that line of questioning today. In terms of the other guys, Michael Mayer, I don't know that he's gonna wow people in the combine because I don't know that he's probably not gonna be the fastest tight end. I mean, he's just a physically impressive guy. To sort of see him do anything in person, I think will probably wow some people. But I don't know that the numbers that we see will be eye popping. But the production sort of speaks for himself. The ability to produce at a high level when everyone knows the ball's going to him sort of speaks for itself. And Brandon Joseph didn't hesitate to call him the best tight end in the draft, and he got in there trying to having to cover him in practice, and I'm sure that wasn't a fun time for him. So I think that he has some stuff to prove, and then Jarrett Patterson's the last one. Will be the last one to work out of the Notre Dame guys, and I'm interested to see what happens with him and where does the NFL see him? Is he a center? Is he a guard? He had so much success at center. I think his season this past year was impacted certainly by his foot injury to start it. I think he was starting to play more like himself as the season progressed. How much of that is held against him? How much is he limited in terms of his position versatility at the NFL level? I don't really know what that's going to look like, and how much of that will be determined at the combine this week. I don't necessarily have a great feel for that, so I'm curious to catch up with him. Also, just sort of ask him what he thinks about Harry Easton leaving and how that all played out. So it's certainly a newsworthy time down here, and we'll see who has the best, who we deem to be have done the best for themselves by the end of the week.
Yeah, I think Patterson will end up playing center in the NFL, but that's just my take on it. Nobody asked me of the NFL personnel people.
I should have asked you. That's my fault.
I should also I'll give you a perspective on the 4.64 40 that
Sure.
Isaiah ran unofficially. So I keep a log of all the combine and pro day 40s collectively and by position. So, and this goes back to the 2010.
And specific to Notre Dame.
Specific to Notre Dame.
Not everyone. Yeah.
Right. Not everyone. There are, I mean, if you go online, you can see historically, I don't know that theirs goes all the way back to 2010, but they at least have like the last 10 or 12 years. But of the people that have been in the draft cycle since 2010, the fastest up until today by a Notre Dame player, defensive end or defensive tackle, is Dalen Hayes at 4.69. So Isaiah Foskey would be the new fastest person. Now let me give a few caveats. There are 5 guys that did not run the 40 for various reasons. Khalid Kareem, Julian Okwara, Isaac Rochelle, Stephon Tuitt, and Capron Lewis Moore. Capron was injured. Stephon was injured. He ran some hokey thing with his agent at a high school. I don't even know if it was 40-yard dash, so I didn't count it because I didn't feel like it was on the record kind of time. Isaac Rochelle was injured. And then Khalid Kareem and Julian Okwara were injured at the combine. They were going to run on pro day. And again, we got into the 2020 with the pandemic, and there was no pro day, so they weren't measured. You know, certainly one of those guys, probably Julian Okwara, would be challenging for the fastest, but they didn't. And so now we have a new king, and that'll be Isaiah Foskey. He also has done his jumps. He was a 10 foot 5 inch standing broad jump, so that it's not like the long jump in track where you have a running start. You stand and then you jump. That 10.5 was near the top of his position group of the guys that jumped today, defensive ends and edge players. And then he was at 34 inches in the vertical leap, which was kind of middling. Wasn't a great day for the vertical leap for him, but it wasn't horrible. It was just kind of average for defensive ends today.
All right. And we'll see what everyone has to do. Brandon Joseph will be next up tomorrow doing his workouts, and then the day after that will be Michael Mayer, and the day after that will be Jarrett Patterson.
So you'd say, well, what happens to the Adamalola twins and Tariq Bracy and those guys?
Sure.
They will have a chance to compete in the same kinds of tests at pro day, and usually because of the caliber of high draft choices Notre Dame will have, most of the teams will be representative, if not all the teams. So they'll get a chance to kind of show off. And sometimes kids can do really well at the pro day and make their case to be drafted. But, you know, if you had told me at the beginning of last year that Jason Adamalola wasn't going to be at the combine, I would have not believed you. I was, and he didn't have a great year, but I still think that's a guy I would have wanted to bring in for the combine. Bracy, what's against him isn't his productivity, it's his size. You know, he's not long, he's not big, you know, he doesn't have a lot of heft to him. So there are other cornerbacks that have comparable production that are going to get looks before him. Justin Adamalola had a really good year. I don't know that he has the burst. Josh Lugg I could have seen going to the combine just based on his size. I mean, I don't think he was an elite lineman, but as a Harry Easton guy, that usually gets you a ticket in the door.
Jason Adamlola was the one that was the most surprising to me that he wasn't invited. The Tariq Bracy, I mean, I think he played well enough to get invited. The measurables, I think, are the thing. And I feel like I don't necessarily have data to back this up, but it seems to me like cornerback is one of those positions where there's just guys from all kinds of schools you've never even heard of that are just freak athletes that the NFL is really high on in terms of cornerbacks. And they end up, I mean, some of them end up for a good reason. Like you can get cornerbacks from seemingly anywhere, it seems like, and there's a lot of good cornerbacks out there. So I wasn't as surprised that he wasn't on the list, but I think he definitely played at a level that would have been deserving of being invited this past season. He was a really important part of Notre Dame's defense, and one thing I'm interested in monitoring is how they sort of replace him.
Right. So we're right at about an hour. Do we want to jump into the next topic or save it for another day?
I think we can save it. I think that's good. We still have plenty of things we can talk about next week, and nothing that I feel like will be ruined by the time we come back next week. So let's wrap it up there. We'll be back next week at a date to be determined. My initial thought is maybe we wait till after we talk to the players on Wednesday, so maybe next Thursday. But like Eric said at the top of the show, make sure you're subscribed. Make sure you hit the bell for reminders so you can get notifications, so you can keep us in mind and we can keep you informed of when we'll be doing the show. And also, I mean, we post about it on our website, InsideNDSports.com, post about it on our Twitter accounts and our Facebook page. Anywhere that you can follow us, we're going to let you know that we're coming to you with the Football Never Sleeps and when it will be. So we appreciate everyone who came in and submitted questions. And
we forgive Smoke and Scott for coming in 30 minutes late, as he confessed.
You are forgiven.
So, we appreciate everybody that asked questions or just lurked and made fun of my pronunciation of people's names.
I like the people who make fun of your names. Not as thrilled about the lurkers. No, I'm kidding. I appreciate anyone who stopped by, and feel free to share this with your friends that may be interested in what we talked about today to watch on replay, because we do have a pretty large replay audience, and we appreciate them as well, even if they weren't able to join us at 5 p.m. on a Thursday, which I understand not everyone can do that. But as always, we will be on the Inside Lounge message board, updating folks on the latest ongoings. We will have coverage of the NFL Combine as I'm here down in Indianapolis, and we will be producing content for InsideNDSports.com.